Welcome to the Jaco Report. I'm Charles Jaco. The Missouri legislature, at least the House, has passed what's been called the toughest anti-abortion law in the United States. Missouri now has one abortion clinic for the entire state run by Planned Parenthood here in St. Louis. The U.S. Supreme Court has about a dozen abortion cases in the pipeline, and any one of them is likely to give the court's conservative majority a chance to overturn Roe v. Wade and make abortion illegal again in the United States. Most observers believe the court will end up leaving it up to the states as to whether to outlaw abortion completely. States like Missouri will do just that. So what then? How will women get abortions if their states made it illegal? The choice, it would seem, would be between a woman being forced to give birth or forced into breaking the law. Joining us today to talk about abortion rights in Missouri once Roe v. Wade is overturned and where we sit right now is Mevy Mead. Mevy is Director of Policy and Organizing at Planned Parenthood Advocates in Missouri. Also with us is Pamela Merritt. She's a writer, activist, and is co-director and co-founder of Repro Action, an abortion rights group that, among other things, has been counseling women on how to do self-managed, do-it-yourself abortions using a new generation of drugs. Welcome to you both. Thank you very much for being here. Mevy, let me start with you. Before we went on the air, you were saying, you know, it's all well and good to talk about what the world is going to look like after Roe v. Wade, but right now you guys are fighting your darndest to keep from getting there, specifically aimed at this law in Missouri that has passed the House that would make abortion illegal after a fetal heartbeat could be detected, which is about 5 weeks. What are the chances of stopping that, and do you think it's just going to sail through and be signed and go into law?
Absolutely not going to sail through anywhere. There are a lot of people that are really upset about this and have been building for years their opposition to these political attacks on this critical aspect of healthcare. So I don't think that this is going to have an easy time sailing anywhere. It's the most extreme bill that we've seen in the country. It actually contains 5 different ways to ban abortion in addition to other medically unnecessary restrictions. So this bill is too extreme for Missouri. And there's no doubt about that. The Senate is much more sensitive to what people think about this issue, and they like to think of themselves as a more rational or deliberative body. And so there are some fantastic champions for reproductive health in the Missouri Senate that are absolutely going to be fighting this ban. And I just want people to know that what it looks like we're in right now in Missouri is a political race to be the state that overturns Roe. And that political race has costs. It has expensive legal costs. It has human costs for women and families who need access to this critical part of healthcare, reproductive healthcare, including abortion. So shame on those politicians, and it's incumbent upon us to make our elected officials know that Missourians just aren't going to stand for this extreme legislation. And the Supreme Court is watching. They're watching what's happening in the states, and it has an impact on how they think about this over 40-year precedent that has made our healthcare what it is today.
But Pamela, you've got to know that with a dozen cases in the pipeline involving abortion heading to the Supreme Court, any one of them could end up taking abortion back to where it was in 1972, or in this case, probably leaving up to the individual states. Your group has been looking ahead in case that happens. Talk to me about the seminars, the webinars, the workshops you've been holding, and the advocacy you guys have been doing for so-called self-managed abortion using pharmaceuticals. First off, why do that?
Thank you so much for the question and for the opportunity to talk about our self-managed abortion campaign. Self-managed abortion with pills is something that has happened since the abortion pill became available. And actually, women in South America were the ones who discovered that mifepristol, which I always mispronounce, I apologize, would allow for that option and something that they could manage outside of a medical setting. So we know that people have been self-managing abortion with pills. The World Health Organization actually considers the medications to be absolutely medically necessary. They're necessary medications, and they have a protocol that is available on their website for how people can self-manage abortion with pills. So our campaign is, and just to be specific, we don't walk people through, guide them through the process. We are sharing information that is available on the World Health Organization website. We are sharing information about the protocol that the World Health Organization has made available, and we are making sure that people understand where they can get additional information and counseling, and also where they can get legal advice.
But one of the reasons you're doing this is you're anticipating Roe versus Wade being overturned and women being left to their own devices if they live in a state like Missouri where abortion is illegal. True?
Yep, that's true. But here's the flip side to that. What we're also anticipating, because we are reproductive justice organizers, is winning. And I know that seems so bizarre to be talking about while we're looking at a daunting 5-4 majority that is anti-choice on the Supreme Court, and we're seeing all these bills moving through local or state legislatures. But the reality is that we are on the right side, and that when we organize and support and stand with women, communities thrive. And so I fully believe that we need to be organizing, and we are organizing with the anticipation that we want to increase access to abortion. And that means we need to have access to abortion at providers, at Planned Parenthood. We need to make sure that abortion funds are vibrant and are well publicized so that people can afford their procedures. And we need to increase access to self-managed abortion with pills.
I was talking to both of you before we began rolling about in the late 1960s, early 1970s, there was this group in Chicago called the Jane Collective, women who essentially ran an underground railroad when abortion was illegal, providing safe houses for women, providing clinics where they could get abortions, providing recovery services, maybe transportation to and from. This was all done when abortion was completely against the law, and yet women didn't stop having abortions. A very simple question. If we go back to those days, or we get a split where in the majority of states abortion is suddenly illegal, do you anticipate a return to a form of underground railroad, whether using self-managed abortion or a network of people that will provide people the wherewithal to go to states where abortion is legal? Because I'm wondering what happens to women in these states if abortion becomes illegal. Eddie?
So at Planned Parenthood, we support women getting access to the reproductive care that they need in the best setting for them. And so what history tells us is that women, and let me just say that 60% of women seeking abortion have children. So these are people who are protecting their families when they're making this decision about when and whether they can have another child or put a child up for adoption or end that pregnancy. So yes, you are right. Women will seek the health care they think they need for their family. And the question for those of us who want people to be healthy and safe is to think about the ways that enable people to do that. So we already know from states that are contemplating banning abortion, the Google searches for self-managed abortion skyrocket. Like we're talking hundreds of thousands of searches. So I do think that this is something that it's good that organizations like Repro Action are talking about and helping ensure that people are healthy and safe. Of course, right now, Planned Parenthood operates under current law and will always operate under the law, and will always support women accessing the health care that they need in the setting that's safest.
So just to make it clear for people who might not be aware of the state of abortion access in this country, women and people who experience pregnancy are already struggling to access abortion. And in Missouri, where they have to drive from all parts of the state, and then other states that access care at Planned Parenthood, we have a mandatory 72-hour waiting period, which doesn't have any exemptions. So people are having to navigate that process, and Planned Parenthood does a remarkable job of helping people navigate that process. And we have abortion fund here in St. Louis that helps people who might not be able to afford the procedure be able to afford the procedure. But throughout this country, particularly in the Midwest and the Upper South, there's already a crisis of access, which is one of the reasons why we feel it's important that people understand self-managed abortion. The other thing that's important to know is that abortion existed before Roe, and abortion will exist after Roe. No one is going to stop abortion in the United States of America because it is a necessary part of health care for women. It is going to happen whether or not we go after Roe or pass bans, and the issue is whether it is going to happen in a safe way, and obviously whether women are going to go to jail. And just want to add one more thing. The logical conclusion of abortion bans is women going to jail.
You anticipated my next question, which is, if you take the abortion bans, whether in Missouri, Arkansas, or any one of dozens of other states, to their logical conclusions, you end up with two alternatives. Either number one, a woman will be forced to give birth essentially against her will, or number two, if that woman seeks and gets an abortion, she becomes a criminal and could go to jail. In Ohio, there was a bill that failed in the legislature that would have criminalized women who get abortions. Candidate Donald Trump said in March 2016 that there needs to be, quote, some form of punishment, close quote, for women who seek abortions. A lot of people say it's science fiction to think that way, but Mevi, do you think that there is an actual chance in this country we are going to come down to that choice where a woman will either be forced to give birth by law or face jail time for having an abortion?
I don't know how to speculate. I don't have a magic 8-ball. What I do know, and I think that we should size up the situation right now, is why. Why are these elected officials, these politicians, separating out healthcare from the rest of healthcare? What is at the root of this? The people who can become pregnant need to get separated from the health care that they need. This is really about misogyny and keeping women out of functioning in the economy and keeping them out of our mainstream healthcare system. So I think people should spend some time preparing for a potential negative outcome, but much more time in the current political process, exercising the outrage that that scenario should bring on to make the political change to get the win that Pamela talked about.
Look, you've got a lot of lawmakers in places like Jefferson City who, when it comes down to it, seem to look at women as essentially candy wrappers for babies. If something like this passes the House in Missouri, given the conservative right-wing nature of the entire Missouri legislature, including the deliberative Senate, what do you think the realistic chances are for stopping something like this? Because it passed the House overwhelmingly. It seems to have overwhelming support in the Senate. I mean, specifically, what would the strategies be to steamroll this and to try to stop it?
So poll after poll, and really, kitchen table after kitchen table, when you talk to people from Missouri, they don't think that the government should be making the decision on their health care. They want freedom of choice for their health care providers, and they don't want politicians getting between a woman and her physician and her decision making. Missourians repeatedly oppose that, the majority of Missourians. And sometimes Missourians don't exercise that opinion at the ballot box, so they just need to start doing that. The Senate is more sensitive to that. I'll also say there's an element to this debate that's pretty scary. People need to know that in mid-Missouri, a few weeks ago, someone threw a firebomb into the health center there, and it's being investigated as a federal offense against, or a hate crime. The Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrance Law, the FBI suspects was violated, so targeted to stop sexual and reproductive health care. It's a federal offense in this country. On the floor in the Missouri House, one of the legislators in closing incited that tried to equate abortion with terrorism. That kind of language, I know many senators do not want to see on the Missouri Senate floor. before. I don't think Governor Parson, whose priority is infrastructure and workforce readiness, wants to see the Senate devolve into people lobbing terrorist accusations at each other and seeing what potential violence could be incited. So I think when people engage in the political process, let their senators know that they want them spending time on things that are going to help us, like expanding access to healthcare through Medicaid, giving students access to sex education. There are things that we want them to focus on, and we need to tell them that.
Your group, Repro Action, besides advocating for self-managed abortion in the worst case scenario of the law changing, has also said that it's going to be a lot more, quote, aggressive, going after a lot of so-called pro-life organizations and people to try to, play by their rules, play on their field and beat them at their own game. Do you think that the pro-choice community has not been aggressive enough in going after a lot of these anti-abortion lawmakers or supporters?
That's an interesting question. I co-founded Repro Action because I felt like there was something missing in the movement. That's not an indictment of existing organizations as much as an analysis that we made, and that we decided to fill that lane, and that we feel it's important to have an organization that is not a healthcare provider and is not a legal organization, and we are a movement group. And I also think it's important that we're not playing by their rules, because they lie. So like the evil light of reality is that they lie all the time, and they manufacture their own stats, their own data, they doctor videos. We actually have a Stop Prosecuting Abortion campaign, and we don't have to doctor videos to capture pro-life leaders and activists saying that they believe that women should get the death penalty for self-managing their own abortion, or that they should be going to jail. We're releasing those videos to the public and calling the question, which is, people are already subject to prosecution for pregnancy outcomes, and a lot of people don't realize that. But addiction, if you are a drug user while you're pregnant, or if you have any kind of motor vehicle accident in certain jurisdictions, you might be prosecuted for a miscarriage. So we know that there's already women who have gone to jail for their pregnancy outcomes, and now we have pro-life leaders who aren't even blinking an eye about the idea of women being incarcerated.
Maybe a final question to wrap things up. Where do things stand with Planned Parenthood here in Missouri and the St. Louis Clinic, which is the only facility in the state that is providing abortions? I would imagine you guys are just overwhelmed. If you've got women from all over the state who, if they need abortion services, have to funnel into one clinic.
So yes, we're overwhelmed both with trying to ensure that women in Missouri and from many other states who have limited access can get the access that they need to the high quality health care that they need. Of course, Planned Parenthood provides a whole host of services that around STI testing, birth control, cancer screenings, in addition to abortion. So we are overwhelmed with the ability to do that given the medically unnecessary restrictions that the Supreme Court already said shouldn't be in place, and that Missouri went through a backdoor effort to reinstitute. So we're working hard on that, but I'm pleased to say that the doctors and the health center staff are amazing, and they're helping those women. I'm also overwhelmed at the amount of support that has been emerging for Planned Parenthood and access to these rights, and I welcome more players coming into this space and doing more work, not less. So I'm really overwhelmed by the power that we need to unleash on this issue.
Thank you very much, both of you, for coming in. Our thanks to Mevi Mead and Pamela Merritt for being with us, and our thanks to you for joining us. We will see you back here next week for another edition of the Jaco Report.